This is tutorial 1-1 in GIS tutorial workbook 3. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to create a geodatabase, building a logical model. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to organize our geodatabase. This is going to let us know what we want in it, what attributes we want, what kind of shapefiles we want, and this is actually done outside of ArcMap. Now, they tell you to print out the forms that we're going to be working with. Obviously, you won't be able to see what I'm doing, so I'm going to just do it in Excel, which wouldn't be a bad thing to do in Excel, then print out, because then you wouldn't have to deal with messy handwriting. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to your Esri Press folder, wherever it is, and in the data for GIS T3, you're going to go right here to where it says GDB Design Forms. And as you can see, we have our geodatabase name that we're going to give this. And in our scenario, we're working with the city to create a geodatabase for parcels and who owns them. So what they're going to have us do first is they're going to have us name our geodatabase, which is just land records. And we're not going to have a data set in this exercise. Now, here we put type of feature classes we're going to put in our geodatabase. And down here, they give us the abbreviations for point, line, and polygon. Point is NT, line is L, and polygon is poly. Now, when you're doing this, you should spell everything and abbreviate things and capitalize things as you would want to see them inside your geodatabase. This will prevent confusion and slip-ups later on. So that's another reason it's good to do this on a computer and then print it out if you're going to be distributing this to other people. Because there would be problems down the line if people were using lowercase when they should be using higher cases. So we're going to make this a poly. And we're going to add our first feature class, which is parcels. And we're going to give it an alias, because sometimes people don't know exactly what a parcel is. It's just property ownership. Now that we have our shapefile, we're going to have to give it a table where it'll have attributes. So you're just going to come down to this tab, and we're going to give this some attributes. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put what feature class you're talking about over in the first column. So parcels. And then we're going to give it our first attribute field name, which is subnames. Now, it's important when doing field name to never have a space. If you've ever added a field in an attribute table, you'll normally get an error box and they'll put an underscore in. And so for this, they want one word for subname. If you do break it up into 2 words, you have to use an underscore. And this is going to be a text. Then they want us to put BLK also as a text. And that's another good feature of doing this in Excel. It has the autofill in, which can help you sometimes because it'll help prevent you from spelling something a different way than you have done previously. Now, as many of you have probably come across when working with shapefiles downloaded from the internet, you might have a field name where you don't really know what it means. That's where this alias comes in, and we're going to be giving it a more descriptive name. This is subdivision name. block designation. And people working in this field that are dealing with parcels, they're going to know what these things are, lot number, where they might not know the abbreviated form for a shapefile. Now what we're going to do next is we have lot numbers and all this, but the main thing with parcels is address. Now we could just do one field called address and have it everything, including street number, street name, zip code, and state. But the thing is, if you ever want to geocode reference this with a database, we've done that in a previous book, you're going to want to use a different method. And what they do is they break it up into multiple fields. They'll have a field just for prefix type, house number, street name, street type, zip code, state, city. So an important thing to do also is to know what kind of field names the program normally associates to these fields. That way it runs much smoother. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our My Computer, and we're going to go to your program files folder. It's most likely under your C drive. And you're going to go to your ArcGIS folder. And you're going to go down into locators. And here for US address, .lot, you're going to right click, open with Notepad. Now you can come all the way down and try to find it, but it's a little bit quicker and easier just to put house number in the find feature. And as you can see, it kind of brushed us down. So we're just going to scroll down until we find what we want. And I know this can be kind of confusing to look at. Actually, I'm going to see. There we go. You want it to say field role name equals primary house. And what this does is it gives us a list of preferred names for this field. And that could be either house, house num, house underscore num, house dash num, and so on. And it does this with multiple things. It does it for pre-direction or prefix direction, prefix type, street name, suffix type, zip code, a lot of things, state abbreviations. So once you know what kind of field names to give it, you can assign one. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the ones the book give us. So the first one is pre-type. It's text, and And, and once again, it's important to keep the spelling and everything the way you want it to appear in your geodatabase, including capitalization and whether you use an underscore or one word. Now, the next thing we're going to be doing is going into what kind of use the parcel is being used for. Each parcel is going to have its own code showing that what its primary use is, whether it's a single family house, if it's a duplex, if it's a church, a school, something like that. And this li, that's a long integer, so it's a long number, a whole number. I forgot the range that it goes from, but it's a pretty big range. I think it's like in the billions or even higher than that. And our last one is going to be georeference. Now we're going to come over here and we're going to assign whether we're going to allow null values or not. Now, many of you that have worked with attribute tables before, you have most likely seen a null value before, and it just means that they had nothing to put there that fit their purpose. Some streets do not have a prefix. So what you're going to do is you're going to have to allow that to have a null. And we're going to assign whether they're going to have a null or not for each one of these. Now, I'm just going to use y and n. So y for yes and n for no. So the only ones that we're going to allow for null are pretype, predirection, and suffix direction. And the rest get no. And it's in now for each one of these that are assigned an n, they have to have a value of some type. And in order to standardize what those values are, we're going to give it a domain name. So we're going to go to land use code, and we're going to go give it a D for domain rather than subtype. And we're going to name what our domain is going to be called. Now, zip code, street name, street type, and all these things, their values are so variable that there is no way of assigning a domain to it, really, except for maybe street type, because you have roads, drive, and place, so you can break it down to what codes you want to use for that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So once we have this filled in, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our domains worksheet. And up here, we're going to tell them what domain we're going to be using. And that's our parcel use codes. And it's use codes for parcels. And it's going to be a text. And it's a coded value. And the first code we're going to be doing is A1. And then we have to say what that's going to mean. So that's a single family detached. Now, if you ever have worked with land use before, you've probably gone into the metadata and saw what these codes mean. This is pretty much how they do that in an organized way before even starting building it. And I'm not going to do all of them because there's quite a bit. The only thing to be careful here is when working with some of these ones, like I'll just put a few examples, like city, it is important to have it all capitalized or a spelling to which you're familiar with, that what you want it to appear in your geodatabase. Because if you have it spelt different or shown differently 2 or 3 ways into this worksheet, you're bound to have some problems later on when you're working on this geodatabase, because it's not generally one person doing a huge database like this. It's going to be multiple people. And if you were to do a definition query and you had city, and maybe sit, you could run into problems. Or even, city. You'd have 3 different city values. So it's always important to keep it standardized. And city is just developed city property. You can go through and do the rest yourself. And we're going to give a domain to another field now. And that field is going to be street type. And we're going to go back to our domain. We're going to go to domain 2 because once you're done, this one's most likely full. So we're going to give it our domain name of street type abbrev. Now, there are different ways to abbreviate types of streets. For me, I honestly don't know them all. If we go into our Esri Press folder, this is the one that has them all. And as you can see, there's just a huge list of them. And this standardizes them because you don't want, you have roads, and just look at that. It's just different. So, street and streets, abbreviations. So just if it's plural or if it's singular, it's going to affect what the code's going to be. And we're going to be using that file to standardize it. And rather than go in here and fill up this entire thing, we're just going to put a map to it to where they can find it. And later on, we'll go into how to import that into the geodatabase, but that's into a later chapter. And this is just street type abbreviation. It's a text, and it's a coded value. And rather than write them all out, we're just going to give its folder location, or its file location. Now, we're going to go back and we're going to add a new field to our parcels. And this one's going to be called plat status. Now, what this is, there are three values we're going to have. It's platted property, unplatted property, and plat pending. Now, what it means by platted is that it has been given some kind of underground infrastructure, piping, maybe electrical wiring. And unplated is maybe just agricultural land where it's just there's nothing, no structure underneath it. And that's very important because if you're going to be buying land, you want to know what's under it. So it's very important to know whether there's piping. If you have to like maybe plow a field, it would suck if you hit a septic tank. So we're going to name it plat status, and we're going to give it a short integer, abbreviated as SI, and it's just plat status as its alias. And we're not going to allow null values. And we're going to give it a subtype field. Okay, now we're going to go to our subtypes folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to name it plat subtype. And we're going to give it codes because it's easier to write a code than write out the whole thing. So 1, 2, 3 is easier to type than platted property, unplatted property, and plat pending. So that means it has infrastructure under the ground. Unplatted property means that it's just soil. Plat pending can mean a number of different things. It can be a field or a piece of plot of land that no one's really surveyed, or it could have been surveyed but not recently, and it's up in the air. Sometimes agricultural land is abandoned and a house is built onto it. Then that house might be demolished. And it might have infrastructure underneath the ground. So this is something that has to be, if it's not 100% sure, you want to use plat pending. Just shows them that they need to go in and check it out more. Now we're going to go back to our geodatabase, our main one. We're going to add a new feature class. Now, with a polygon, I'm going to draw this right here, and say this is your polygon. As you can see, each side of the polygon is the same. You cannot have a polygon that is different. You cannot have one where the sides are a polygon where the sides are gone and the top has one line and the bottom has two lines. Or you can't do one where the top is thin and the bottom is thick. Just get rid of that real quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new feature that will allow us to do that. And the reason we want to do that is we want to show what borders of the polygon are doing what. Whether it's touching property of someone else's, if it's touching property that belongs to the same owner, or if it's touching public property like the street. So you're just going to skip a line. We're going to put an L for line. And then we're going to call it lot boundaries. All one word. And then we're going to give it an alias. I find it weird that they, for something that long, they don't abbreviate, just like lot bound or something. It just seems odd to me, but we'll go with it. So we're going to go to our tables now. We're going to skip a line because we're no longer working with parcels. We're working with lot boundaries. And we're going to give our first attribute field name line code. And it's going to be text. And it's just line code. And we're not going to allow nulls because obviously we're going to have a value for everything, so we should not have nulls. And we're going to give it a domain. And we're just going to call that domain parcel line codes. And then we're going to go into domains 2 again because this one should be full from when we did this one. But this one, we didn't really fill it up, so we can just continue to use it. And we're going to call it our parcel line codes. And it's line codes for parcels. And they're all going to be text. And they're going to be coded values. Now, the first code we're going to have is row. Lot. And split. And row is right of way. Lot is lot line. I forgot which one of these is which. I don't really do a lot of work with parcels, but I think one of them is, I know one of them is a line that's, I think this one splits property owned by the same individual. So if you own two adjacent properties, you'd have this line. This is the one I think that would be bordering like the street or sidewalk, and this one would be, I think, the one if your neighbor or the neighboring parcel was owned by someone else. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to create a relationship with our geodatabase to a file that will contain records of ownership. Because if we go back to our geodatabase, land records, who owns what is one of the major things about land records. It's just not important knowing what the property lines are and what they're used for. It's important to know who owns them in case you ever have to contact them. And that's why the addresses come into handy sometimes for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our relationships tab, and we're just going to name the relationship class, and they want it ownership. And the origin table is parcels because that has all the address information. And then we have tax records, 2010, and your taxes show you or tell what properties you own. So this is a good way of finding out who owns what, because even though you might be living in a house, you might not own that house. So the city doesn't really want to contact you if you're a renter. If it has to do with something important, they'll contact the owner. And we're just going to have this a simple, and I'm just going to put a thick border around it so it looks like it's circled. And the origin is going to be parcels. and the destination to origin, or I'm sorry, it's parcels. Parcel is owned by is the origin. And this is owner has ownership of. And this kind of wording can be kind of confusing. Message procreation. The book really doesn't explain what this is, and honestly, I don't know too much about it. I think it just means how it will tell you it, and what the book tells us is for this case, we don't need one. So you circle none. Then we do coordinality. We have 1 to 1, meaning one value will always have one matching value. Or we can have 1 to many, which means one value can have many other corresponding values. Then there's this MN, which is many to many, because obviously a parcel can be owned by more than one person, and those multiple people can own multiple lands together. So I don't know why they use the abbreviation MN. Maybe it's many to numerous. I don't know, but that's the one that they want us to choose, because I don't know why they don't just use M to M. It just seems to make more sense to me. But moving on, we're going to, yes, there is a table name, and that is ownership underscore rel. And that's going to write the relationship table as that. So okay, now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to choose this. And once again, I haven't done much work with relationships and like this type of thing, so I'm not 100% sure what this is. So I'm just going to follow what the book does. I'm thinking the georeference is a code that both of these things will overlap with, and it's going to be how it determines relationship. Now, we're going to go to our tables worksheet, and we're going to add a table. And it's our ownership underscore rel. And its field is going to be percent owned. And it's going to be a float because there's going to be a decimal place, so we can't have whole numbers. And it's just percentage owned, because some people might not own all of it. They only might own a small fraction. If there's 2 people, it might be 50-50, might be 70-30. And we're going to allow nulls, just because sometimes that information might be really hard to find. So it wouldn't be right to tie this up just for something like that. And we're going to give it a default of 100 because more properties are just going to have one owner than multiple owners. And that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to be learning a little bit more about creating folders like this and files. So that's it.